We are so excited to have been welcoming Naomi Hirahara here to the museum for so many years now, with so many of her wonderful, wonderful books. But this is the first one that we've had back in person in a while, so we're really excited to see you all here. I don't think Naomi needs much introduction, but Naomi Hirahara is an Edgar Award-winning author of multiple traditional mystery series and noir short stories. Her Masarai mysteries have been published in Japanese, Korean, and French. And her final Masarai mystery, Hiroshima Boy, was nominated for an Edgar Award as well for Best Paperback Original. So her first historic mystery was Clark and Division, which we did the program for virtually. And now we're welcoming you all here for her newest book, Evergreen. So with that, I want you to put your hands together and give a really warm welcome to Naomi Hirahara.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. It is a lot cooler in here than out there. So, although I've been advocating a lot of outdoor activities, I have to admit the AC is very nice. So let's see if this advances. Okay, good. So how many of you read Clark and Division? So quite a few of you, but some of you haven't. So we are going to talk about Evergreen, but I would be remiss to mention Clark and Division, which is the start of the Aki Ito story. So I'll just give you a real brief description. So Clark and Division is actually intersection in Chicago. Any people from Chicago here? Or who've spent any time lived in Chicago, right? So I guess just the mention of Clark and Division at a Chicago bookstore will get some people to buy it. They don't even care what the content is. So it is a pretty well-known intersection, but this is the place. So Clark and Division actually starts in a place called Tropico. I don't know if any of you recognize that name, but it's a name for Atwater. So near the Glendale and Los Angeles kind of border was this community called Tropico. So that's where the Ito family, they lived there. The father's part of the produce market. And then World War II breaks out, so they are forcibly held in Manzanar Detention Center. And from there, the older sister, the shining star, Rose, she leaves first for Chicago. And then some months later, Aki, who narrates these two books, she and her Japanese immigrant parents, they set out for Chicago, only to discover something tragic has happened to Rose. So now it's up to Aki, the younger sister, to find out what happened, to get justice, as well as carry her parents through this very tumultuous time in their personal life, as well as in Japanese American resettlement history. With Evergreen, and here, Life After Manzanar, this book to your right that was co-authored by myself and my friend Heather Lindquist. And we did that for the Manzanar National Historic Site because they had so many people come through their doors saying, what happened to people after they were released? And it turns out Chicago was the number one destination. And just the research that I did for the nonfiction book gave me the idea that there's something that a mystery writer can investigate that we can't even dig out, in terms of being nonfiction writers, because unfortunately so many of those people have passed away. So, so Evergreen. Anybody know where Evergreen is? Yeah, it's in Boyle Heights. So now the story moves back to, so we went from 1944 Chicago to 1946 Los Angeles. And so Aki moves back to her beloved LA with her parents, but it's not the same LA that she knew. You know, they cannot live in Tropical, so they live in Boyle Heights. And I wanted to first read the epigraph in the beginning and then a section from the first chapter. While we were gone, the military dismantled our fishing village in Terminal Island. While we were gone, schools and cities buried our Japanese community gardens. While we were gone, Dutch immigrants looked after our flower market in downtown Los Angeles. While we were gone, Black defense workers from the Deep South, having no other place to live, moved into empty buildings of Little Tokyo. While we were gone, beloved classmates mourned our absence. While we were gone, thieves plundered our storage units. While we were gone, Baptist churches rented our temple buildings. While we were gone, our competitors took over our farming operations and produce markets. While we were gone, friends wrote letters asking the government to release our Issei fathers from alien detention centers. While we were gone, White Memorial Hospital birthed babies in our hospital in Boyle Heights. And then, after 4 years, we returned. So Aki returns, and she's not the same. LA's not the same. What's different, she has a job as a nurse's aide in the Japanese hospital on Fickett Street. And also, she's a newlywed. Her husband, however, is not with her. He is with the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, and he's still in Europe, even though the war has officially ended. So I'm going to read to you a brief section from chapter 1. I had only been working at the Japanese hospital on Fickett Street for a month when Haruki Watanabe was brought into an examination room. The one Issei doctor on call was treating a patient who had been suffering from severe hypertension. It was up to me to take Mr. Watanabe's vitals and update his medical chart. I was only a nurse's aide, not a full-fledged nurse, but the hospital had just reopened in spring 1946, 4 years after we had been sent away, and the facility was severely understaffed. Mr. Watanabe had sad eyes with bags that drooped down onto his sagging cheeks. Everything about his face seemed to be melting away. His lip was swollen, and the side of his face was beet red, inflamed from some kind of trauma. The only sign of vigor was in his hair, still jet black and abundant, like a badger's coat, despite his 52 years. I put the glass thermometer under his tongue, which was thick and streaked with bacteria. His temperature was a little higher than normal. I gently took hold of his wrist, which was sturdier than I expected, to take his pulse. His pulse was fast, but that was not unusual when people came for emergency care. I spied something red on his upper arm and lifted his shirt sleeve. Bruises the pattern and color of smashed raspberries, not fresh, but not months old either. What's happened here? Nandemo nai, he said in a low voice, as if he didn't want anyone to hear. Realizing that I was a Nisei and might not understand much Japanese, he said it in English too. Nothing. I got a cotton gown out of the cupboard and left it next to him on the examination table. Can you get dressed in this? Doshite? I only have head problems. The doctor will probably want to do a thorough checkup. No need, he insisted. Please, Watanabe-san, I said as firmly as I could. I had found that attaching san to their names usually softened the most distraught of Issei patients. I left the examination room, closing the door behind me to give him some privacy. Dr. Isokane appeared from around the corner. He had been in Santa Anita Assembly Center, and then Manzanar like us, and then Topaz after that, serving other Japanese Americans in bleak wartime camps. He was older than my father and should have been thinking of retirement, but instead had dedicated himself to those who had been exiled. Isokane-sensei, I handed him Mr. Watanabe's medical chart and shared my concerns about the bruises on his arm. The doctor didn't reveal any emotion. He was trained, after all, not to be shocked by practically anything. Is he working? He asked in Japanese. He was, as a driver, not as a gardener or janitor, no taxing physical labor. I wondered if he was a good driver. He was living with his son in an apartment in Little Tokyo. Dr. Isokane pulled his stethoscope out of his white coat pocket and looped it around his neck, a sign that he was ready to see his patient. I excused myself to prepare for the vaccination of children at a hostel down the street. I was gathering needles in our storage room when Dr. Isokane appeared from the examination room. His mind seems fine, but I want him to get x-rays, he told me in Japanese. Some hearing loss, but that's not unusual for his age. Did you see? I asked. Dr. Isokane had. Apparently there were bruises all over his upper body. Life has been hard, he concluded. I searched his face. Was he saying that our Issei elders were all walking around with wounded bodies from the wartime experience and beyond? Or was he making an excuse for some kind of continual abuse? An orderly, a Nisei who had been in Jerome, Arkansas, helped me wheel Mr. Watanabe from the examination room into the x-ray room. He was dressed in a gown and clutched something so intensely that his knuckles were turning white. What do you have there? I asked him. I gently turned his fist to see a gold pocket watch, the second hand meticulously ticking around the dial. The old man snatched his hand back, protecting his treasure. As the orderly strapped him onto a gurney, I asked him, "Who brought you here, Mr. Watanabe? Perhaps he can hang on to your watch." "My son, Shinji. I'm not sure if he's still here." "I would like to speak to him." "Doshite?" Mr. Watanabe's face revealed fear more than irritation at a lowly female nurse's aide. "Job of doctor desho." This wasn't simply a case of an old man falling down the stairs, as was stated in the intake papers. I had seen my share of old-timers who had taken tumbles. Bruises, first red and inflamed, followed the pattern of their fall. Mr. Watanabe, on the other hand, resembled a human cheetah with spots all over his upper body. I decided not to fight him over the watch. The orderly wheeled him off to get his x-rays. Shinji Watanabe wasn't sitting in the waiting room. The receptionist reported that he was in the hallway having a smoke. The son's back was toward me, a halo of cigarette smoke around his head. The surge of tobacco won out over the constant odor of disinfectant that usually overwhelmed our corridors. "Shinji Watanabe," I said softly, almost afraid to be in the presence of someone who might have caused Mr. Watanabe harm. The man turned. The lights were bright in the hallway, casting a yellowish tinge over his broad face. Even healthy visitors ended up looking sick when they entered the hospital building. I stood there frozen, hearing a rush of air escape from my lips. I knew this man. Mr. Watanabe's son, Shinji, had been my husband's best man in our Chicago wedding a year and a half earlier in November 1944. So Shinji's nickname was Babe Watanabe. And Watanabe, as many Japanese Americans know, it's like Smith or Jones, very common. So that's why Aki had no idea that this Shinji Watanabe was Abe. So now it's up to Aki again to find out what's going on. And first of all, she has to do it without her husband, but he eventually returns from the war. So why did I write about the 104th 42nd Regimental Combat Team Soldier? does everyone know about the 100th for 4-2? The most decorated World War II military unit for its size. And my late father-in-law, Toko, had been a member of it. And it was all Japanese American, except for, of course, the officers. So this photo was taken at Heart Mountain, and that's Toko on the left-hand side. If you write down his name, you could search on it on Google, and it'll kind of tell you about his military exploits. And this is the woman that he would marry is on the far right. And so he was visiting. So this was like the biggest irony, right, for a lot of these Nisei soldiers that they were fighting when their loved ones were behind barbed wire. And what I would do after I got married, because I'm totally into Japanese American history, right? So we have you heard of "Go for Broke"? That was their motto, because they fought so ferociously. You know, they would, and so I would buy him like "Go for Broke" kind of books and things. And one day he told me, "Naomi, don't do that anymore. It's not nice." And I was mortified because I didn't, I was trying to honor him. But it made me think that there was another side, like we want to celebrate the heroism, but there was this emotional a sacrifice that also went into it, that especially someone like Mr. Fukuchi, who had experienced a lot of battle, he was on the front lines. He sustained a wound to his leg that he wore a brace for the rest of his life. And so, he had been dealing, I think, from, what was called shell shock. Now it's post-traumatic stress. And we've, I think, seen or heard a lot about World War II vets, but I don't think so much from a Nisei point of view. So that got me interested. If I was going to do a follow-up to Aki's story, the incident or whatever had to be something very close to her. I didn't want to just send her out to be an amateur sleuth, solving random crimes. It had to be something of consequence. So I thought, well, she was going to get married. I mean, spoiler alert, sorry for those. Well, I'll just say she got married to someone who's going to war. And so I thought, oh, this is something I could explore. And I happened to tell Brian Nia, who many of you know, he's our little encyclopedia, Japanese America. And he's got this list of weird stuff. And I go, yeah, I'm thinking of like looking into post-traumatic stress by, the Go for Broke guys. And he said, oh, I have a list of crimes committed by veterans after the war. This is not something you really want to look at. But I think it just humanized, like they saw a lot of, these are just fresh-faced young men, and they saw trauma. So, of course, for some people, it's going to follow them. And unfortunately, a lot of the victims happen to be people in their family, that they would have nightmares and, all that angst was directed towards people around them. So that's why I started exploring more this storyline. Another part of the book that was very close to me was, many of you know I worked at the Rafu Shimpo, first as a reporter, then as an editor. And so what's been very difficult for me is when I want to go into the archives, because I used to have to do that microfiche. Oh my gosh, you get dizzy, right? You got and then all these machines were breaking down, and then the few that had the machines, because of COVID, you couldn't get access to it. So, and I knew I wanted to set it in 1946, and Rafu Shimpo, that's the biggest Japanese American daily, and it still remains. It doesn't come out every day, but it started reprint. It was closed, of course, during the World War II and reopened on January 1st, 1946. So, and then they would have it, the archives at Stanford. I went to Stanford, but they still wouldn't give me access. So I was like, ugh. And then I come to find out that actually Los Angeles Public Library, they bought the license to the archives. So all of you who have a LAPL card, all you have to do is live in California, just go over to the Central Library or whatever library that's close to you, and you can get a card, and you could access all of this stuff. You could look up your name and see, your basketball scores, all sorts of important things. And so this was very integral for me. And so this is how historic I am. This is a photo of me with Henry Mori, and it's like 90 years in Little Tokyo. This is at the Rafu Shinpo's 90th anniversary, and this was printed in 1993. That's a long time ago. That's 30 years. That's 30 years ago, right? Crazy. So. So Henry had been the editor. He had a column called Making the Deadline, and he had worked, I think, Rafu before World War II and after. And he became a friend. And so what do I do in Evergreen? I put Henry Mori in there. So I hope his family is okay, because I manufactured these scenes with Henry. But just knowing his personality, there's a lot of real people that are in Evergreen. By name. And I don't have them doing anything criminal. But just like, it was kind of important for me to have them travel, through the book. So one person is Elmer Yamamoto, who was an attorney, and he had an office in the San Pedro Firm Building, and that's for those of us in the community, that's Mia Yamamoto, an attorney, that's her father, and so he gave me permission to insert her father into the book. So that's been a lot of fun. Yeah, okay, so this is a map, and for those of you who didn't get a card, definitely get a postcard. And these are just some of the locations that are in the book, real life locations. One thing, so Soho Press is my publisher for these two books, Clark and Division and Evergreen, and I love that they include maps. So what I'm going to be encouraging you, I know it's hot out there and you might be tired, but we have, I also want those who are interested and who don't have one to pick up this little piece of paper, and we have like an optional walking tour. But one thing that's really cool is that the spot for the finale club, which is outside of the landmark sign, is by Aze Restaurant. That where we have Gary Fukushima actually playing jazz from that particular time, and Robert Shoji, who has done a short film called The Finale Club, he'll be giving some background for folks who are passing by. So that's going to be done, I think, 3:45 to 4:15. So if you're around, I encourage you to do that. Who's been to Far East Cafe? Yeah. Yeah, you love it? Oh, good. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, the three locations are Boyle Heights, Little Tokyo, and Burbank. Okay, so someone did ask me about Boyle Heights. Why did I set it in Boyle Heights? Well, that was the one community that was open to Japanese Americans who are coming back from camp. So of course that was one reason. Another reason why were actually these photos. This is what we unearthed when we were doing the book Life After Manzanar. And these photographs were from a European woman who worked in New York, and her name was Marion Palfi. And I was just amazed because we're so used to either the camp photos by Dorothea Lange or Ansel Adams, where everybody looks very neat and tidy. Their hair looks perfect, and the rooms are very clean. But this room kind of looks like how mine was during the pandemic, like that one section in the back of your Zoom is clean and everything's chaos, right? And this is chaotic. And this was at the Evergreen Hostel. So one of the locations, there was a fairly large hostel that the Presbyterian Church was administering, and this was one of the many places that were open to Japanese Americans returning back to Los Angeles. But just looking at those little girls, there must be sisters, and their two beds are, pressed together. There's a basin on the floor. I think there's a little Raggedy Ann. In the foreground, it looks like a rafushimpo. They're probably the fathers or mothers trying to look for work. And just, the clothes hanging from the walls, just chaotic. And when I saw this, I go, that's what it must have been like for people returning. And we don't hear those stories that often. I think everyone wants to put up a good front. They want they want a better future for their children. But it must have been very difficult. And so because of the Evergreen Hostel and other things on Evergreen, that was one reason why I wanted to set it in Evergreen. So these were also Palfi's photos. And both Heather and I love this photo to the left. It was the LA County Library had this. I think the young man Jun Oyama had donated it to the library. But look at this girl. You don't want to mess with her, right? And you don't see these kind of photos, with the War Relocation Authority. And it was just so interesting, so emotional. And so those kind of things, when I have scenes in the hostel, it kind of helped me to kind of imagine what it was like for those children. And this woman, the baby's naked. Of course, babies are naked, right? It's hot. But you don't see that in the War Relocation Authority. But it's a very sweet photo. So, so it just makes you think of photos, of what it really represents, and how much of it is all truth, and maybe some are not exactly, reflecting everyday life. So the Evergreen Hostel, the building is still there. It's located. It was known as a fellowship hall. I think they're going to do something with this building. I'm not sure what, but it's still standing, and you could take a look at it. When it cools down, we want to do a walking tour of Boyle Heights. So if you join my newsletter, I'll let you know about that. How many people have relatives that are at Evergreen? Many, right? So I knew that Evergreen Cemetery, Evergreen Cemetery is so iconic. In Clark and Division, there's also a cemetery in Chicago called the Montrose Cemetery. It was one of the few that it was the only cemetery that accepted Japanese bodies. And this is before World War II. And I think Evergreen, too, for us as a community, that's where you have a paupers, lot. Chinese American bodies are there early, pioneering Chinese. You find the African American section, right? And there is also a Japanese section, as we all know. And so one thing I had to just check, we all know about that very tall obelisk with the gopher broke, the soldier on top. And so there's a scene at the cemetery, but that wasn't built yet, so I couldn't include it. So that was the hard thing, because I'm dealing with a very, 1946, and I have to look at that one little piece of time. Another thing that was in this general area was, it says Evergreen Baptist Church, but actually it was known for a period of time as a Nisei Baptist Church. And this was Stephen Nagano. His father is Dave Nagano, who was the pastor at the time. Oh, Paul, I'm sorry. Paul, Dave is his cousin, right? Paul Nagano, sorry about that. So Paul Nagano, I'm glad that you keep me honest. So Paul was a young, he came out of camp to lead this church. And so I'm grateful. So Steve, he, gave me little snippets of oral histories that Paul had given about starting the church. During the war, Mexican congregation was in this particular building, and then it was returned to the Nisei. So someone spoke about Hammer. Hammer kind of, hangs out here, so you'll have to read the novel to find out more. One thing I will say, I guess at this time, oh no, I'll do it with this next one. Next slide, yeah. So the Japanese hospital on Fickett Street where some other people have been born at this hospital. Can you raise your hand? Hi, yeah. So it was a pioneering hospital in so many different ways. They also challenged, because there were alien land laws, and this was a corporation, right, that had not an individual that had purchased the land before World War II. So it was contested. They was saying, well, you can't have a Japanese hospital like on this you can't buy this for this purpose. And it was challenged. And the principles behind the Japanese hospital won. And you could look this on Discover Nikkei, which is connected to JANM. They have stories about this, written by Troy Kaji, who's related to one of the pioneering doctors behind this. I couldn't remember where this photo to your right came from, but Dr. Kuroiwa, who was also a pioneering doctor, I guess he had donated this photo. So, Aki is a nurse's aide. She doesn't become a nurse as she wanted to, at least in the beginning of this novel. So you could find out about it. This photo doesn't show any Latino nurses or nurses' aide, but I put one in there. So I took certain liberties. I didn't do a deep dive of, I don't know if there was records of nurses' aides, but I know that they serve different people in the community. And just from my work at Rafushimpo, we all know Mario Reyes, as well, the photographer, as well as years ago there was a Latino sports writer for the newspaper, as well as there's also stories of one part Latino boy who went into Manzanar voluntarily just to be with his friends. So that was kind of something I wanted reflected, especially Boyle Heights being, especially now, a predominantly Latino community. My friend Barbara Phillips is here, so she helped me with some of the names and other references. And Barbara is a beautiful embroiderer, so that's what I worked into, Chole's. That's what Chole does as well. Okay. Next slide. Yes, and the Breed Street show, if you know Boyle Heights at all, this is one of the prominent temples, Jewish temples in Boyle Heights. I think they still have plans to do things with that. I went to the Hanukkah ceremony that was there. I guess it was two Hanukkahs ago. But I would recommend there's a couple of Boyle Heights historic societies, and just search them, and you could find out about different activities there. Okay, now where we are, Little Tokyo. So Little Tokyo during World War II, as was alluded to in the epigraph, so it was emptied, right? All the businesses and people of Japanese ancestry were removed. And it was a sore spot, actually, because we're right close to City Hall. And then around the same time, because of all our defense factories, a lot of African Americans from the Deep South came over to work in them. And that experience, I think Chester Himes, the writer, as well as Walter Mosley, he talks about those kind of experiences in their books. So when they come, there's no place for them to live. You know, they are wanted as laborers, but because of racial covenants, they don't have any place to live. And then the city authorities, they kind of point to this area right where we're standing. Well, this is kind of empty. You know, why don't you all move there? And it was kind of overcrowded, and there wasn't good sanitation. But this was like a thriving African American community, and it was called Bronzeville at the time. And what was culturally, what was notable was they had all these jazz clubs. They call them breakfast clubs, because people would work the night shift. They would get off work. They'd come to Little Tokyo and, you know, eat pancakes while listening to jazz. So that was, so that was a very rich and vibrant time. But there was also a lot of poverty, you know, in these areas. So, so I wanted to reflect that in Evergreen. Next slide. So this is what I was alluding to before about the Finale Club. Amazing. Charlie Parker and Miles Davis performed there, right? 1946. And one thing that was of interest to me, so this Finale Club, it's no longer there, but it's right there on First Street. So there's a landmark sign right there. One thing that I didn't know, I was just thinking that it was just like African American musicians for African American audiences. But when I was going through the pages of the Rafu Shimpo, there are people like Lucky Thompson, who's a notable saxophonist that played there for a Nisei, like dance. And so that was really interesting. So that's a particular piece of fact that I integrated in Evergreen as well. And if you go there between 3:45 and 4:15, you'll be able to hear Gary Fukushima playing jazz on an old-fashioned keyboard. And Rob Shoji will give you more information. Next slide. This is, do you all know where the Kajima building on First and San Pedro, they used to have a Sumitomo Bank there. That's kind of the area. There used to be a Miyako Hotel. We have the new Miyako, but this was the old Miyako. It was called the Civic Hotel. I think I wrote, the Civic Hotel, it was renamed during World War II. And then in addition to the cleaners, there's also, I think, Mbun, so the grocery store was there. And then this Bronzeville 510 25-cent store. And it was run by S.K. Ueda, who later, had a couple of locations in a department store. So, So I had to integrate that in the book too. I also had to put Manju, right? So actually, Fugetsudo, although it has a really long history, it was in a different location. But Mikawaya, which is now since closed, it was on this block as well. Next slide. Oh, okay, and y'all, Far East, of course, was, there were so many chop suey houses. Sanko Lo, I think, what's another one? There was a ton, there were like 3 or 4. if you go to any kind of Japanese American old community, there's chop suey houses. We just liked it, you know. And it was interesting during the pandemic. I kind of, I really wanted to eat chashu, you know, and all this and I actually tried to make it. It's a lot of work. You got to keep your stove super hot. So it just, when growing up, our family, my dad was a gardener. We only went to 2 restaurants for the longest time. One was Ernie Jr.'s in Pasadena, and the other one was in Toro, or Far East Cafe. So this is the hangout for Aki's husband, who's now working for the Rafu Shimpo. Okay, next slide. So this is more notorious. And this is actually, when I was, you know, because I am a crime writer, I'm always looking for crime. So I'm like LA Times, you know, Little Tokyo Crime, you know. And so there was this low-income hotel that's further north. It's north of the old Union Church or East West Players. But it was the St. Mark Hotel, and you know, just like how it was a domestic squabble, but it turned out to be this big shootout, and that just got me interested. So the San Mark no longer exists, but I kind of made that a key location for my book. Okay, next slide. And Burbank. Why did I include Burbank? Because Burbank had 2 transitional housing units. And one was this place, Magnolia Boulevard and Lomita. And what does this remind you of? It reminds of camp, right? And so the folks that lived here, usually they were poor. They were either people with a lot of children or older people. So, so this is one of the images that we came across for Life After Manzanar. So these were more barracks, and then the next slide. But they also had trailer parks. Anybody, their family live in the trailer parks or the barracks in Burbank? Anybody here? I don't see. When I was looking through the Rafu, the more recent ones, actually Takeshi Nakayama, who's the associate editor when I was editor of Rafu, had written something in the pages of being young in the barracks, trailer park, excuse me, and talking about getting into fights, you know, and kind of being egged on by the older, you know, the older folks, maybe young adults, to kind of fight each other. And so that was a seed for me to write a certain scene in Evergreen. But it was almost, they didn't have any plumbing. There was a lot of confusion in these temporary housing facilities. So it was very awful. It was very bad for a particular time. Next slide. And this is kind of not that clear, but they had a soup kitchen here too for people to eat. Next slide. Yeah, so that's just a sampling of the research that I did for Evergreen, and just wanted to field any questions for you all. And Joy, yeah, she's getting the microphone for you all.
Yeah, if you have any questions, you can just raise your hand. If we just keep them short so we can make sure we get to as many as we can.
This is a reporter from Japan.
Hi.
Don't go too hard on me.
This is regarding Japanese hospital. Japan.
Hi, yes.
Japanese hospital or Japan hospital? Which is?
Japanese. It was called Japanese hospital.
Okay. And it's from when to when?
I believe someone from JANM is it was like 1920s, right? I think that's originally. You could just look it up.
I know.
On Densho.
Okay.
It'll tell you everything.
Okay, and I visited there recently, just from outside, and it's different now.
Yes.
So the records of the hospital's activities, or a list of doctors or nurses or patients, is there such thing?
It should be here, actually, at the Japanese American National Museum. Like that one photo was donated by Dr. Kuroiwa, so I imagine, I would check out the archives here.
Oh, here.
Yeah,
Okay.
make a request. Anyone from JANM could elaborate further for me?
Yeah. I'll talk to you after.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jamie's our archivist, so.
Well, Jamie, maybe you could say some general things.
Unfortunately, Kristen and Sean, our director.
Oh, okay.
Would know more.
Yeah, Kristen Hayashi actually helped to get the designation. There's a city historic designation, right?
Our department director, Kristen Hayashi, and our coworker, Sean Iwaoka, they worked to pull together a lot of the photos. I want to say like 1929. Don't quote me on that at all. But we have some early materials. So collections at janm.org.
Yeah.
I will say we did early on, I think around the time we did maybe Clark and Division, we did a program virtually with Dr. Kristen Hayashi. It's on our YouTube channel as well. It's all about the Japanese hospital and has a lot of that content as well.
Dr. Troy Kaji, who I mentioned before, he's done a lot of work, and there might be a paper. I know on Discover Nikkei, he's written some things about the Japanese hospital.
Yeah, I think the hospital started, I'm Amy Kato, by Francis Kaji's father, who was the doctor, Tatsuno. So that it was started by a group of Japanese doctors in the 1920s.
Yeah, so they were Issei, huh?
Issei. So Mrs. Kaji's father was a doctor at Manzanar, and he continued advocating to have this hospital made on Fickett.
Yeah, I think the healthcare first started off like an individual Issei doctor, like in his office, and then it kind of expanded to this more official capacity. Yeah.
Okay. I have a couple of questions. First of all, is that building still there? The Japanese hospital?
Yes, it is. It's
Cool.
some other medical facility, but yes.
And who was providing that soup kitchen at that trailer camp?
Ooh,
Do you
good
know?
question. I don't know. That's a really good question.
And where was it located in Burbank? That's my Burbank friend.
Okay, there were two locations. I showed you that one.
You showed the permanent Magnolia.
The Magnolia. It wasn't permanent, but Magnolia actually, the Winona one was longer, it was right across from the Bob Hope Airport.
Oh, okay.
So that's one of the ironies. Like you're saying, this is a very seditious, suspicious group of people. Then why are you putting them right next to the airport? And there's a lot of military activity there too. So that's a lot of things that don't make any sense.
No, none of it.
I read your book. I live in Burbank.
Yes.
And I'm obviously Japanese American Sansei. And when I moved to Burbank in '79, I had no idea of the history that Burbank held about the Japanese after the war. And just happily, cluelessly, naively, and I've never experienced any kind of discrimination or prejudice living there from 1980 on, which, thank God, sentiment has changed about that. But I was totally shocked that there was a city mandate. Of course, I shouldn't have been so shocked because Lockheed Air Industries built Burbank, and this is a war effort. But I was wondering how it happened that they actually allowed a temporary, horrible, disgusting temporary trailer park and housing to be put there, and then what happened to it after? It probably got dismantled and got moved away. So I just wanted to say thank you for bringing that part of history alive, because it was totally unknown. And given I don't really know what happened after that, and I don't know if you know anything beyond what you presented in the book.
So, there were other temporary sites. One was in Lomita. So they were kind of trying to consolidate people in different places. I believe the War Relocation Authority had some role in creating this, they were trying to do a transition for people, but at a certain point that agency was folded. So I think that added to the confusion, like what agency is supposed to take over. I think there was some public housing, agencies involved with that. I don't, that's with Evergreen, I think I'm just starting, I just want to present this as questions, and for you to do a deeper dive with, I think you need to look at some academic work, which will, like Kristen's dissertation, and there's other things that I'm sure will be published in the future. And those things will answer your questions. One interesting thing is I did go to the Burbank Historical Society. It's a pretty interesting space, right? They had old cars and things about Disney, but there was no mention of these, temporary sites. Even one photo I think would have been informative. But I understand you don't. I think probably what happened is the War Relocation Authority, they were identifying certain locations, maybe because the government owned that property or whatever. So that, and nobody, it's like not in my backyard, nobody really wanted those kind of communities there. And there were actually opposition, people, there was public dissension, people saying, no, we don't want this. But I guess the WRA could assert, pressure to create those housing units there at that time. So you guys are asking me really hard questions. You want me to be an expert about all this stuff. I'm a mystery writer, okay?
Well, actually, I have an author process question from
Okay, thank you.
from our live stream audience online. Clyde asks, what's the proportion of time spent on researching the subject matter versus writing the book?
Actually with Evergreen, because I had spent all this time working at Rafushimpo and just being immersed into this world, I didn't have, it was more using the Rafushimpo, as a resource to kind of just get the dates correct. They were like signposts. And there's some cases where I moved them just for the sake of the story. And there's an author's note where I address that. Because sometimes, to have a certain, Aki's doing her thing. I can't have this certain hearing right here. I got to move it. So I did take, liberties as an author there.
This might be a general question to all your novels, but I'm really interested in the language use in your novels. So I see lots of insertion of a Japanese word and expression in your characters. How much of it does it reflect the language use of Issei and Nisei? And how do you decide which word the character, what Japanese word the character uses?
My mother's from Japan, and my dad was a Kibe Nisei. So I'm kind of a Nisei myself. So I know of a different time and era, but I kind of I just kind of lean on myself and my particular tastes and what I think would resonate. And I think probably working, like I know like for a certain generation of people, bachi. Yeah, you're laughing, right? I kind of know. You talk to Japanese people, young people, bachi, they don't know what it is. Right? So it's a certain community, it's a certain generation. So so I find that, you know, some people say bachi, oh, is that for taiko? I think they call it, like, right? The bachi, you know. And the other Italians, is that bachi ball? So a lot of it is very personal, you know, and I do read correspondence. So there's some words that I wasn't familiar with that I included in Clark and Division that I didn't use, but I just saw it repeated in certain correspondence. And I go, okay, there's a pattern, and it's also something that delights me. I don't know, it's very personal. So this word delights me, so I'm just going to put it in. I've gotten in trouble, though, from a New York public librarian who's Japanese, and she didn't like my use of Japanese, and she contacted my editor. Well, we were part of a Zoom, and she gave a list of everything. She was looking at it as proper Japanese. And then the way, like, Aki's mother would talk to her husband was a little more rough and tumble. You know, it wasn't like keigo or, you know, the order, right? If you're a woman talking to your husband, you're supposed to use this or that. And it was like, no, this is Japanese America, so it's not going to be the same. And I actually did get something wrong, romanized it. So if you have the first edition hardcover, if you have a hardcover, I think I wrote pachanko, which means flat, but it's supposed to be pechanko. But growing up, like certain words, I just heard it. I didn't write, you know, I did go to Japanese school. I know some of my friends here also went to Japanese school. We didn't learn much. We were avoiding. But I would never write pechanko. It's just something I heard. So in the romanization, I got it wrong. But then I just kind of justified, well, Aki is like me. She's just hearing it. And then one of my girlfriends is like me, and I said, okay, Colleen, is it pachanko or pechanko? And she said, pachanko. I go, see, you know, we're both hearing it. We're hearing it, but we're not, you know. But I did change it for the paperback. I did change it to pechanko, to PE. But, you know, so I guess for that part, it's not analytical, you know, it's so intuitive. The language part is intuitive, and some people really dislike it, like the way Masarai talks. That's the most controversial part of my writing, but I don't care because enough people really love it, you know. But you can't make everyone happy. You know, I think as a writer, and you just have to own it, and don't, you know, everyone has a right to their opinion. Readers have rights, but as a writer, you know, I'm trying to do something that may be hard to understand. It was interesting because when I was in New York, a friend, he's Jewish and Japanese, and he was saying he didn't like. His father's Jewish. He didn't like the way Masarai spoke. It was embarrassing to him. But then, his mother was from actually Boyle Heights. But then he noticed, like, okay, he could deal with Walter Mosley. He could deal with S.A. Cosby, you know, who writes about the South. When it's certain dialect from the South, or maybe used by African Americans, he was okay. But when it came to Japanese, he felt ashamed. So he said he was going to relook. He was going to reanalyze. So, maybe it was a kind of thing like, as a Japanese American, we want to show that we can speak English, correctly. But there's code switching, right? When you're it's just like in Hawaii, we have our own kind of JA pigeon and times of a certain generation. That's going to go away, right? If it hasn't already. But I want to at least capture it for a certain time period. Yeah. How we're doing on time is okay. Yes.
We have time probably for a couple more questions.
Okay.
We have one up here.
Okay.
I was wondering if you already know if Aki's story is a trilogy or beyond, and similarly, how did you know when it was time for Masarai's last story, his last book?
With Masarai, I had a heck of a time in publishing. The first Masarai took me 15 years. Summer of the Bibachi. Yeah, it was really tough, and you figure. An old Japanese guy, a gardener who solves crimes, who speaks in dialect. That's tough. And now, ironically, there's a lot of mysteries that have older characters, like Richard Osman, they're bestsellers. So things have kind of changed. But in 2004, there wasn't that much of a market. So I've had to keep pushing, and then I lost my publisher 2 times with the Masarais. So it's a miracle that I was able to finish. And my goal would, because it was an homage to my own father, it's not my father, but men like him, I wanted to end it strong, and I kind of knew in my head, so 3, 3, 1. So total of 7. The last one, he has to go back to Hiroshima. I knew it had to end. And then by that time, he's in his 80s, There's only so much he could do action-wise, right? So it's 69. But what's interesting is I'm very much approaching Masarai's age, at least in some of the big bachi. But yeah, so that's, and I think 7, some of it is just numbers, the magic of numbers. I knew the 7th. And then, so that's, and then each Masarai I was experimenting with different themes, so I was touching. One was actually the baseball one. Sayonara Slam, I was kind of, the last one's Hiroshima Boy. The next final 3, that was more the Sansei story. So I was looking at Strawberry Yellow, was looking at high tech. I mean, you guys would never imagine this, but high tech. Sayonara Slam was looking at the cult of celebrity. Oh, and Blood Hina was looking at drug abuse. So I felt that was kind of the Sansei story. So yeah, in terms of Aki, right now, I'm thinking these 2 books are this is Aki's story. They're the 2 bookends. Some people have been pressuring me. How about if you visit Aki when she's a lot older? Possible. But they're called the Japantown Mysteries. I'm going to jump in this universe around. So the next one I'm working on is set in my hometown of Pasadena. It's called Crown City. And it's going to be 1903. So there's a character called Louise. I just happened to throw Louise in, and she's from Pasadena. And it's going to be her father's story. And he's a carpenter from Yokohama and arrives to Pasadena. And that one, I needed a break because those Clark and Division and Evergreen are pretty heavy books. And I needed a lightness. And if you spend any time in Pasadena, it's a pretty bright place, right? It's so beautiful. And I'm taking a look at the arts and crafts movement, the Japanese influence on all that. I'm digging out all these great, individuals, these artists. It's really exciting. And there's some ties actually to Chicago. I can't get away from Chicago. The Chicago World's Fair, in 1983, that was the introduction of this Japanese building, this village that Frank Lloyd Wright saw, and the Green and Green brothers from Pasadena happened to see. The Green and Green brothers, if you look at their homes, a lot of Japanese influence. They never spent any time in Japan. So that part intrigues me. So yeah, I'm kind of looking at all of that. So yeah, that's due. I have to finish that by next year. But I do want to go to Detroit. I want to explore these different places that our characters went to and kind of see what happened to them. But thank you for asking. Joy, where are you?
I'm here. I think we have
Okay.
time for one more question.
Okay.
I know that some folks have their hands up. I'm so sorry, but we do have to keep to time. So we have one more here.
My friend Mas Soji that I told you about, he was from the Big Island, but he's like pidgin. That accent. But what I'm trying to say is
this
that,
Frank Martinez again?
Yeah. But
We were laughing about our connection and
right.
the members' conversation. Yes, Frank.
Okay, and my friends that Spanglish we would say, but Japanglish, but because I get it in my culture because I can't speak perfect Spanish. And Eric Estrada, if you remember from the 80s, he went to Mexico and he made a soap opera called Dos Mujeres Un Camino because his Spanish wasn't perfect. Just like the issue you have with if you don't say it right, you're gonna get criticized. So.
Oh, he got criticized?
Yeah, because
okay.
if he couldn't say it in Spanish, he'd say it in English, and people in Mexico were going nuts because they were like, "You gotta have." Like you were telling me.
What is the term? I hope it's not derogatory.
No,
isn't it pocho?
Pocho, yeah.
Yeah, pocho.
Meaning I'm born here, but my
Yeah.
culture is from over there.
Yeah,
When I go to Mexico, my Spanish is boy. But yeah. So I see that, and Eric Estrada had a big issue in that.
Well, if
That's
Eric
soap opera.
Estrada had a problem, then
You're
I don't
okay.
mind having a problem too.
You're okay. You're okay.
Thank you, Frank.